Hi, my name's Steve Albert. I'm the instructor for this course, Macroeconomics. That's macroeconomics with an A, not an I. That's microeconomics. Different. Now, macroeconomics does a particular thing. It's a particular process. We measure the economy and set some goals about what we want the economy to do. We build models to analyze the economy, and then we suggest some policies to help the economy. That's different than microeconomics. And we're going to do that this semester, and it's pretty straightforward, and I think you'll get the idea. I'm going to keep saying this over and over. That's not the first time you're going to hear that, or I mean the last time. But before we do this macroeconomic thing, you have to learn a little bit about economics in general, and it's kind of microeconomics-like, because macroeconomics is kind of new. When you took economics, say, in 1935, there was no such thing as macroeconomics. This class didn't exist. All there was microeconomics, and they would just call it economics. So everywhere around the country right now, people are starting macroeconomics. The way they're doing it is they're going to start by thinking about economics in general first, and that's what we're going to do. Just for 2 or 3 weeks here, we're going to look at what economists think about, and we're going to focus on that for a while, and then we start to get into macroeconomics proper, where we measure and set some goals, we build some models to analyze the economy, and then we suggest some policies to help the economy. But for now, we just kind of have to start by thinking like economists, learning a little bit about something like economics, which is how you start microeconomics as well. But remember, this is macroeconomics. Here we go. Ready? Step 1. Economics is about scarcity. There's no doubt about it. Economists look at the world and they say, here's a big problem. We have unlimited wants. Human beings just seem to never be satisfied with what they've got. But we have limited resources. And so one of the things economists do is they try to figure out, how do you solve this conflict, this problem between human beings having unlimited wants versus the fact of the world, which is there are only so many resources like land and labor and energy. And economics in general tries to help us with this problem. Microeconomics focuses on markets and how markets might help us solve that problem. Macroeconomics, which is this course, considers something else. Macroeconomics considers, if you have a lot of unemployed people, would that be a good thing to satisfy people's wants? In other words, you have people who aren't building stuff, you have people who aren't producing services, you have people who are unemployed not making things, which means there's a lot of wants that are unsatisfied for those people who want those things. If I'm unemployed and I'm not teaching economics, and you want to learn economics, but there's no teachers to teach you economics, there's a problem. So macroeconomics focuses on unemployment in the economy, and you can think of that as, if we employed people, we could satisfy more wants. But anyway, scarcity is key. Microeconomics, which we've talked a little bit about, and macroeconomics are definitely different. Like I said, microeconomics has always been around. It's about individuals, companies, and markets, whereas macroeconomics is more about the whole economy, the big picture, and you use words like unemployment and gross domestic product and inflation. And we'll get into those in more detail. Those are actually the measures and the goals we set. And macroeconomics does get political, and this class will get a little political. And here's the key to that politics. The key is the idea of governments, because macroeconomics has a kind of government perspective attached to it. And essentially, we can boil this whole class down into these two questions. Can a government alter the economy, meaning the federal government, the president, or the state government, the governor and the Congress? Can they affect the economy, and should they affect the economy? You can start to see where the politics comes in. Not only is it political because the people who get elected as political officials start to address the economy and make policy, but it's also political because there's a general question about whether the government should be in the economy at all. Here's a gross generalization to kind of get you warmed up about that politics. You might think about it like this. Now, you really shouldn't because people can't be categorized so generally, but we're going to do it just to kind of get our heads around this. Democrats say, yes, the government can alter the economy, and yes, the government should alter the economy. And Republicans say, no, the government cannot alter the economy, and no, the government should not alter the economy. You know, that might be a little familiar for those of you who are a little politically mindful, but you know, I got to tell you, it's a pretty gross generalization. Of course, there are Democrats that say the government probably should not alter the economy, or there are levels of whether the government should or shouldn't. Of course, there are Republicans that say the government should alter the economy, maybe here or there. Again, different levels. But in general, just to get our minds around this thing called macroeconomics and kind of warm up about the politics behind macroeconomics, it has to do with that government intervention. Should the government enter the economy or not? Look it up here. Suggest policies to help the economy. That's where that government intervention occurs. We'll learn more about that later. And before we leave this particular topic, I wanted to make this comment. This is not a new debate about politics in the economy. When you think of George Washington, the first president of the United States, he put into his cabinet two people, Thomas Jefferson, who was vociferously for smaller government, individuals, you could even say a market economy. And he put Alexander Hamilton in the cabinet, who is an individual that was for a stronger federal government and for action on a federal level. And, you know, it's kind of like in the very beginning of our country, this debate about how much government should get involved. So when we get into this class and we have some debates about that, I want you guys to calm down. You're learning about macroeconomics and the way policies are implemented by macroeconomists. If you're a big free market, no government person, you should really learn this stuff and see how these policies work or don't work and learn the language of this to figure out what you really think. And if you're a big government intervention person, this class is going to teach you about some of the mechanics behind a macroeconomic approach to that. So just calm down and learn. This isn't really a place to be yelling at each other. This is a place to learn the macroeconomic approach and think about it and debate it. As a matter of fact, if you're strongly pro-government intervention, I want you to think about the critique about government intervention. And if you're strongly against government intervention, I want you to think about maybe there should be government intervention. More on that later. This is the process that we're going to go through as we learn about macroeconomics in this course. We measure the economy. This starts at about week 4. First, we learn a little bit about scarcity, that's this week, efficiency, that's next week, the second week, and markets, that's the third week. Then we kind of enter the macroeconomic approach. We measure the economy, we measure gross domestic product growth, unemployment, inflation, then you have a midterm or exam actually after that. That takes a while. It takes 4 or 5 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we build some models to analyze the economy. We build something called the aggregate supply and aggregate demand model. We build something called the Keynesian model. We look at the neoclassical model. And what we're doing is we're going to analyze the economy and say, if something happened, what would happen to growth, unemployment, and inflation? So these models are specific things macroeconomists have developed to analyze the economy in respect to these measures. And then finally, after about 3 or 4 weeks of that, we start to suggest policy. How can we do something if there's a shock to the economy to, quote, help the economy? And that's where things get a little political, because if you don't like the idea of governments intervening in the economy, then you're not going to like policies from the government. You just have to take a deep breath, understand where those policies are coming from in terms of a macroeconomic perspective. We're going to look at fiscal policy, which is the federal government intervening, and monetary policy, which is the banks and the banking system. More on that later. In general, I'm excited about teaching this class. As a matter of fact, we've recently had a macroeconomic shock called this pandemic. And before that, we had another macroeconomic shock called the financial crisis. Seems to happen. And in both of those cases, by the way, we implemented macroeconomic policy. So whether you like it or not, this is stuff that happens. Okay, that's all for now. See you next week when we start talking about efficiency in something called the production possibilities model. Bye.